Welcome to Self-Funded. I'm your host, Chrissie Francona. 10 years ago, starting a business around yourself was something reserved for celebrities. Today, professionals everywhere are breaking away from the 9-to-5 and building businesses around their own experience and expertise. On this show, we'll explore what it really means to be self-funded, the movement of professionals carving their own path, creating cash-flowing businesses, and building lasting impact without waiting for permission. I'll share my own journey and talk with others who are rethinking what's possible when you take your career into your own hands. Let's dive in.
Today on Self-Funded, I have Tim Williamson and Gagan Singh of Acquire to Win. The duo first teamed up as colleagues at Salesforce during a very aggressive time of M&A activity, integrating up to 17 deals in a single year. Tim comes from a sales background, brought into the M&A arena to advise on go-to-market readiness for acquisitions, while Gagan has built his career in the core M&A integration space. The pair talk about their individual desires to leave and start their own advisory business, how they leveraged early customer conversations as a proof of concept, and going out together versus on their own. I hope you enjoy today's conversation.
Tim and Gagan, welcome to Self-Funded.
Thanks for having us.
So before we jump into each of your backgrounds, tell me a little bit more about what is Acquire to Win.
First of all, Chrissie, thanks for having us. This is really cool, really fun, and glad we get to take the time to kind of share with you. Gagan and I watched some of your other podcasts, and those are very informative. So hopefully we can keep pace with all the other wonderful and talented guests that you've had.
I expect nothing less. That's why I invited you on. So I'm excited.
There you go. Appreciate you. And we'll just start with the top, the quick version. So Acquire to Win is a boutique M&A integration firm, hyper-focused on making sure that integrations hit their revenue targets. Is the famous statistic that 9 out of 10, 8 out of 10 M&A fail to meet their stated goals. And the fact of the matter is, serial acquirers, those that run acquisitions, 2 or more a year, kind of flip that on its head, and it becomes 9 out of 10 hit their goals. And M&A happens all over the place, throughout segments and industries, regions, wherever it might be, and yet it seems to be very, very hard and often results in failure. And so what we've, with our background that we'll share here in a minute, what we bring to the table is a proven playbook from a serial acquirer's perspective that helps teams run their M&A and gives them the ability to be strategic and market through mergers and acquisitions.
Awesome. Well, I know we're going to get into where you met, which was at, one of the more prominent serial acquirers to hint at that. But let's start a little bit with each of your backgrounds, before you ended up, joining forces, both first as colleagues and now obviously as co-founders.
Yeah, maybe I'll start. So I've been in the M&A space for about 15 years, but I happened into it, kind of tripped into it. I it kind of started much more in the sales area, was in sales supporting roles, and then was actually in a sales role. I've worked at a couple of different companies, Nielsen, the TV ratings company, Comcast. I was in the media space before I ultimately landed at Salesforce. And I've also had the great experience of working abroad. So I spent several years in China and in a year in Australia as well. So my background, I kind of bounced around from companies, bounced around from regions, but have generally always been in kind of the sales side of the company before I joined Salesforce. And then that's where I met Gagan. So maybe I'll pass it over to him.
Great transition.
Yeah, and thanks, Chrissie, too. Just want to echo what Tim said at the top of the call. I've been in M&A for about 12 to 13 years. I kind of found my way into it through interest and curiosity. My first gig was at eBay and PayPal, where I didn't start in M&A, but just through interactions and relationships built, I joined forces with their M&A integration team and worked there for about 4 years. And then during their period of separation, when the two companies were getting decoupled, was looking for new opportunities. Had really enjoyed my time on the team there, and was looking at big brand names, big serial acquirers that I could go and sort of cut my teeth on. I always had this quote in my head. I had a colleague that told me, building your career, really what you want is just war stories you can dine out on over a long period of time. And I just had that kind of stuck in my head. And that's exactly what I found when I joined Salesforce in April of 2015. The company had just done their first major acquisition, which was ExactTarget. And then the following year, what started out as a quiet period, I got to run really fast in their most acquisitive year, which turned out to be, I think, 16 or 17 acquisitions. The first year I was there, and had an amazing time, learned a ton, traveled the globe to really support with that. And then as we were doing those deals, we started to build out our muscle on what it meant to acquire in a way that we were putting the customer first, which is what we'll talk about in a little bit, and also think about revenue generation in a really intentional way. And met Tim through that sort of process they were going through of bringing folks into the company to have that acute focus on top line growth and revenue. And over the years, Tim and I formed a really strong relationship on deals we worked on. I was there for the better part of 10 years. I think Tim 7 or 8. And so I got those war stories I was looking for.
You got the war stories together, it sounds like.
Together, yeah. I think I still have fond memories of sitting across from each other, just throwing a Nerf football back and forth and talking shop. So it was a great time.
So while you were at Salesforce, to just talk me through a little bit about your working dynamic. Were you guys part of the same team? How was that structured, and what role did you each individually play?
Salesforce at that time had a massive M&A footprint, so there was a lot of people on the M&A team. And I actually think that maybe we start with Gagan just because he sat in more of the hub central role, and I was more of a spoke in the model that we had.
Yeah, I think the model Salesforce followed is very typical of most acquirers who are building out an IMO office. So very much the hub and spoke model that Tim is describing, where there's a centralized function that reports in through typically a COO or CFO from a corporate strategy perspective, that has a deal team and an integration team, sometimes a ventures team, and that central team sort of oversees the target identification and goal setting, but also works with the different parts of the organization on how to bring in an acquired business from a front office and back office perspective. And front office is very much go to market when you think about what's tip of the spear. And so my sales strategy partner was Tim in that respect, working on these deals as a business partner in the organization. Tim was fully dedicated to M&A. I'll let him talk about that from a sales perspective. But my role was really being the hub to all the spokes, inclusive of sales, which was tip of the sphere from a front office and back office standpoint.
Yeah, and then I sat in the sales organization, so reported up through the sales strategy arm into the sales leader. And because Salesforce was highly acquisitive and oftentimes was acquiring, basically every time was acquiring for growth, obviously that go-to-market aspect becomes super important, and the sales aspect becomes super important. And over time, Salesforce built a muscle around putting the sales team front and center in the acquisition very early on in the deal process, and then very late into the integration process. And so my role was to represent our global sales teams via the sales leader in our acquisitions, and to make sure that the plan that was coming together out of the central corp dev team was one that was exciting and realistic and was grabbing the attention of our pre-sales, sales, and post-sales teams in the right way for them to execute on the M&A.
So I think your experience was probably unique to the fact that Salesforce, was going through so many major acquisitions. But I think typically, integrations is an interesting space for full-time employment because it's very deal driven. But were you guys just on such a treadmill that you always had deals, and so there was it wasn't like feast or famine, or how did it feel day to day as a full-time employee on the integration side?
Yeah, I mean, I think for where I sat, because I was in such a specialized area, right? You always have sales in some aspect, but the types of M&A deals you might not always have sales, right? It could be an acqui-hire, it could be a tuck-in. Maybe there's some deconstruction that's happening with customers or an offering. But because Salesforce was, acquiring for growth, they felt that it was necessary to invest into that sales arm. And there was such an appetite on a monthly, if not quarterly basis, that there was the right, as you said, treadmill for us to run on. Maybe it was a track. We were running forward, not in place. But yeah, so, and I think we'll get into this in a second as we transition out of the Salesforce and into Acquire to Win. But there was a moment where the realization of maybe not having so many people on one M&A team was exposed to changes in the strategy and potentially reduction in force or cost savings. And we'll get into that in a second, but it is definitely full-time functional M&A resources can be a luxury. I think they're vital and they're important, but you've definitely got to be aware of how much of your cost is out there for you to invest into those areas. I think it's a little bit different for Gagan and team on that corporate development as they're sitting in the hub, because they can bounce from acquisition. They got to do what they got to do on an acqui-hire, on kind of a small adjacency, on a tuck-in, or even a large new kind of line of business acquisition, or at Salesforce what we'd call a cloud. So I think Gagan, your team, a little bit more sturdy on that track, if that's the right way to say that. But the functional team is a little bit more exposed.
Maybe you were more the long distance runners, Gagan. Tim, you were the
sprinters.
Maybe the hurdlers, the 100-meter hurdles.
There you go.
Yeah, I do think that the fun part of M&A is you have to think about the complexion of deals that you're doing and what, to your question, Chrissie, what that means on a day-to-day basis. There's this famous saying you always hear, which is M&A is more of an art versus a science, and very true in a lot of ways. And I think Salesforce, like many other companies, that goes through this learning curve of acquiring across the maturity curve in terms of where businesses are in terms of their customer footprint, their revenue generation, their product market fit. And I think for Salesforce, that year I spoke about where we did 17 deals, we had to come out on the other side of that and really make sense of, what are the different archetypes of deals that we're going after, and how does that inform our long-term planning in terms of how to think strategically about where we need to be and how we need to be resourced, but also how are we prioritizing, sequencing, and executing across those goals for different types of companies along with a resourcing plan. And so, I always had fun sort of thinking about the spaces we wanted to be in and how that would also need to be operationalized, and sort of balancing that sort of thought process of strategy and operations together.
That's great. Okay, I do want to jump forward to often when I do these interviews, it's with an individual person who's sort of figuring out like life transition, professional transition, how to leverage their experience into starting their own business. This is an interesting dynamic because both of you, I imagine, were on your own personal and professional journey of, okay, what's next for each of you individually. And then collectively you came together to start Acquire to Win. So I want to hear a little bit about, from each of you, the thought process behind leaving Salesforce, which, as we've said, is such a incredible brand in the M&A space, but gave you a lot of experience to jump out on your own, and then collectively how you came together to form Acquire to Win.
Yeah, I think that for me, there was a moment after the Slack acquisition where Salesforce, it was a large acquisition. The number that you see out there in the news, $28 billion. Wherever that landed exactly, no one will never know. But it was a huge acquisition, made big waves, and it was one of these acquisitions that was an all hands on deck type integration effort. It was just absolutely massive. And so everybody went into the Slack integration, and it absorbed a whole lot of time and energy. But on the other side of that, there was some interesting forces out in the market, including some activist investors that tried to storm the gates at Salesforce and there was a big riff, and that reduction in force hit the integration team pretty hard. I was not riffed, but I looked up and said, what just happened? They cut almost 50% of the team out of this team, and it was a little bit shocking. And I couldn't point to something that, like, oh, Tim, you were so awesome, that's why you didn't get riffed, right? There wasn't, there was people that were amazing at their jobs and were delivering at a high level that were let go, and there were people that were not, that weren't, and there was it felt like no rhyme or reason in a way. And it for me, it caused me to sit and think about, where do I want to be after this, right? We just did Slack. Yes, we're going to acquire for forever. There's some bumps in the road. Maybe I'm on a treadmill right now, to reference that back. But it was I felt exposed, and I didn't have a good answer on why I was safe at Salesforce. And that's when my head started to think about what are some of the kind of the other things that I could be doing. And I'll just quickly say, so I started to reach out to account executives at Salesforce. They had this program where it was like an innovation center. Customers could come in and just ask questions about how Salesforce runs its business. And one of the hot topics on that was M&A. And so a couple of times I'd been kind of brought into these conversations. Hey, what do you do? Oh, there's sales M&A, or GTM M&A. That's interesting. What do they do? But that got me thinking, so there's appetite for this conversation. So I started to reach out to account executives and say, do you want me to go with you to talk to your customer? Do you want an excuse for a door knock? Do you want to go sell some Salesforce product? Because Salesforce uses all of their tools in the M&A. Perhaps I can go with you and keep myself busy and also start to point towards concrete kind of results in the market. And that thing took off like hotcakes. The A's were loving it. Customers were loving it. I was getting hit up on the side. Hey, can you do any work outside of Salesforce? Would you be willing to come in and help us? And I was like, no. But it got me.
Got you thinking.
It got me moving. Yeah, it got me thinking. And that that all of that was kind of happening at the same time. And that's where my brain started to move. And I had a guy who sat right across from me who was throwing that Nerf
with
football
that Nerf
with
football.
me. Oh, yeah, exactly. All the time, where I was like, hey, guess what? Guess what? And I started to bring him along, and maybe I'll let him kind of walk through that same time period for him.
Yeah, fun times. I don't know if I have much to add to the origin story, because I think Tim's spot on with that. But I think to your the part of your question, Chrissie, on so the personal journey on finding my way into Acquire to Win and making that decision, I'll add, I think for me, I was reaching the better part of 10 years at the company, and had gotten a lot of sort of achievements and accolades and personal fulfillment out of it. I think it's just a very natural stepping stone for me to think about what was next and what could excite me. And of course, I love solving big strategic problems. I really found my answer also in the people that I want to work with, long term. And on a personal statement, just wanting to be in and around A players that I could get along with, were approachable, I had deep relationships with, just became a key tenet of what I wanted to do next. I just wanted to surround myself with those people first and foremost. Salesforce naturally grew, became much larger than when I started, and you sort of lose a little bit of that over time. And so I wanted to get back to that sort of grassroots feeling of being in and around folks I could sit across from and throw the Nerf ball with, and then just also talk shop. And just as I thought about Acquire to Win and what Tim was positioning, on a personal level, I was thinking through, I'm generally a risk-averse person. So I started to do some calculus in my head of like, what does it mean to really go out at this stage in our lives? I think we were both starting families, are in the process of raising families. And so you've got to do the math in your head of what's fulfilling, rewarding, but also financially viable. And so I had to do a bit of that math on, what would it take to do this on a 2-year, 3-year time horizon? What would my mental model need to look like if I was going to pursue this? Could I think about it almost like a full-time MBA, right? And I started to put that framing in my head, along with all the excitement behind, this idea that Tim had, and just had to take the leap and at a certain point, say get off the pod and go. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about those early days, like where, you guys both had left Salesforce, you're starting out. Were you able, Tim, to tap into any of the relationships you had, those people who had said, hey, are you available for work? Did you go back to them and say, hey, now I'm available? Or how did you think about kind of the early go to market for your own business?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I had made a lot of relationships via the acquisitions. It's one of the things I'll say about M&A and folks who are listening to this, who are thinking about maybe a career in M&A, or they've got an offer to do something in M&A, or somebody on a corporate development team is asking them to do some work on M&A, even though their plate is completely full. It's a lot of fun, right? It's hard work, but you get to do a huge variety of activities. You get to meet a ton of people. The acquired company, you're meeting all new people. At Salesforce, you were, depending on the cloud or the business, you were meeting all sorts of people. And so every acquisition that you work on, your network is exploding. And that's one of the fun and advantages of working in that space is your relationships are really, really strong because you go through some really interesting and tough times in M&A. But you also kind of build a Rolodex of people that you will call on. And Salesforce is a big company, and there's a lot of people there, but people don't stay forever. Boomerangs are quite common, but they go in and they come out, and so it was a luxury that the time that I spent there allowed me when I came out to go sit on LinkedIn or go to look at my phone and be like, oh, I know them. I can go reach out to them. And so in those early days, that's exactly what I did. I left. What? Yeah. And now I'm doing this. Oh, that's cool. You should talk to this person, that person, this person, that person, and then kind of the rest is history. You get going. But I think another thing I'll just point out to that question is, you got to do some of that while you're still at your employer. Be careful. You got to do your job, and you got to make sure that you're doing your job well. But as your mind is starting to turn, you need to have some of those conversations in earnest and with full transparency and honesty, because you need to have someone say to you, that's a really bad idea. Or someone say to you, oh, actually, that's pretty interesting. Gagan talked about the math, but have you done the math on that? Is it worth leaving X 100K plus stock options plus bonus plus that a company like Salesforce can lay on top of you and make you super comfortable? Or is it something that you might be able to move past that and gain some speed in your own kind of building of something? And so that kind of last couple of months at Salesforce and first couple of months out were a lot of those conversations. Is this real? Is this viable? Would you, Chrissie, pay for this offering if I were to leave Salesforce tomorrow? Right? And people being like, yeah, nah. Then I would have stayed. But people were like, it's actually really interesting. Depends on your pricing, but let's go talk, right? And that's when I was like, okay. So you got to do that homework first. You can't just step off the side and hope you fly. Yeah. You got to be, mature and diligent in your thinking.
I actually just want to jump in on that for a second. I couldn't agree more with the advice, and it's something I didn't actually really do myself. I did sort of okay, I'm going to leave, take a bit of time, and then start that process. And it's worked out, but it definitely, you plant a lot of seeds with this type of work, and it can take months to, year plus to see anything grow from it. And that was something, looking back my own journey, I wish I had started with those last couple of months while I was still employed, versus cold stop and then kind of kicking that off. So I think that's sound advice from the perspective of the business development, the lead time as well.
Yeah, just picking up on that, is buyer beware though, because then you get going, right? And you start talking about this thing, and I think you've got to have that discipline to say, is it a bad idea, right? And because it gets hard, because you start thinking about it. And I was at Salesforce for close to 8 years doing 25 acquisitions. At a certain point, I was moving from the hurdles to the treadmill, and and it becomes exciting, right? So it's a really hard brain space to be sitting in, but you got to look at yourself in the mirror all the time, and you got to look at maybe the guy you're throwing the Nerf football with, and say, is this real? Is this real? Is this really the feedback? Is this thing realistic or not? And be honest about negative, and be honest about positive. But don't throw all your eggs in that one basket and say, I'm going to do it no matter what they say. So if you do that homework while you're still there, make sure that you are willing to say no to your idea, because it's not a good idea. Hopefully we think acquire to win is a good idea, and we're getting some good proof that it is, but that's the risk that you take.
Yeah. And maybe I'll add, I would say that the other big decision that sort of went into the thinking was having a partner sitting, at least for me, sitting across, to Tim's point, to validate or invalidate those ideas. I don't think I would have gone off and done something like this if it was just be by my lonesome. And I think to Tim's point, having that sounding board to continue the iteration, right? Otherwise, it just gets stuck in your head, is so vital. So yeah, here's to you, partner.
Yeah, that's right. There you go.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I think, Chrissie, one thing I'll add there is, and maybe this is a question that you would go into, but one of the early things that I spent a lot of time thinking about and listening to podcasts and all that kind of stuff was, do you go alone or do you go with a partner? And I think that for me it was very obvious and very kind of helpful, to Gagan's point, to have that partner. I left a little bit earlier than he did. I don't think I had quite convinced him yet when I just said, I got to do it, I'm leaving. And maybe that helped you, Gagan, get over the hurdle. But I started alone for a couple of months, and man, is it lonely when you first step out there, and you're like, well, now what do I do, right? Maybe I'll just go to the gym instead of doing the work that I'm supposed to do, or I'll go get a coffee or something or whatever, right? But I think having that partner to push you, having that partner to be up with you, or down with you, or up when you're down or down when you're up.
I was going to say that's the benefit.
It is such a huge part of it. Like, if it's not a partner, it's an advisor or whoever it might be, but you got to get people in your corner who are not your customers and who want you to succeed. And my advice would be to go get somebody to go on the journey with you.
That's awesome. Gagan, what was it that finally got you over the hump?
It's a really good question. Outside of the idea, I think to Tim's point, we were having conversations around what he was doing, and I think I was helping him build ideas and a path on what could be true. And in those conversations, I think one of the unique parts of our relationship, I think, is we have a really good way of keeping each other accountable. And I have no problem telling Tim that is a good idea and that is a bad idea, and why are you spending your time on this, and why not this? And the more we had those conversations, that advice started to turn into, I could just give you some leverage and some scale and some thought partnership to go and do this in a way that gets you to focus on this place where you should be, right, as the CEO and founder of Acquire to Win. And I think that got me excited to go then and sit down and do my homework, right, burn the midnight oil on what would need to be true for me to jump out and join him. But I also think there's some solidarity here too between the two of us of being in a similar life position of coming out and doing this, but also having soon to be four kids between us and experiencing the same trials and tribulations of going through it together. And I think that also gave me a bit of the edge to say, I'm going to do this with anybody. It's going to be with someone who knows what it's like to do this at this point in their lives and has some empathy. And I think that sort of sealed the deal for me, right? You're going into this with someone who knows exactly the life circumstances which you're in to go and take on this next chapter. What better person to do it with? So I that's a bit of a human element there, but I think that was a big deal. One
thing, as you guys are talking, I'm curious about. I think one of the challenges with starting a business like this, where it's a services business, is people will come to you with some sense of what they want, and it's maybe not quite your focus area. So, but early on, it's like, do you say yes to things? Like, how have you thought about within your services offering sort of fully customized approach versus a more productized offering?
Yeah, it's a big challenge for us. And I think that if I think back to my M&A experience prior to Salesforce, where it was a little bit, and this is anybody that works for Comcast or Nielsen that are listening to this, don't take this as a knock, but it was a little bit more of a free-for-all. They didn't have dedicated resources. They pulled in people to help and support. I think that one of the things that I'll forever be grateful to Salesforce for was they were so disciplined around their M&A that it showed us the power and value of aspects of M&A that have to be true. And one of the things that we say or that we advise that has to be true is when you are acquiring for growth, you are putting your customer front and center, right? And it gets confusing because people are like, M&A, is that the acquired company or is that the acquiring company? Is it their customers or is it their customers? Is it what you did? And it's like, stop. The company that is acquiring to make their customer happy, right? And that like mind frame was one that Salesforce brought to the table that helps us to get very disciplined on what we say yes to and what we say no to. And we think and we're feeling right now that is a value proposition that works well, because if you are acquiring for growth and you have maybe done it once or twice, or maybe you're starting to get some repetition there, you've seen putting that customer front and center actually is exactly what we need to be doing. When it's gone wrong, it's because our customers aren't on board with what we're doing. And when it goes right, it's because they're completely on board with what they're doing. They see the strategic value. And so by us kind of filtering all of our services through that like initial question, is this for growth? And have you thought about what this means for your customer? It gives us a lot of confidence when we say no to say no. And it gives us a lot of wind in the sails when we say yes, that we've got a good opportunity, that we can go deliver for this, that we've done this across this 50 times. And as we're growing, that we're getting some more experience with people that also see that value. And so, yes, the services and every acquisition is different. We are coming in and helping a team that will have a playbook, and we're going to enhance that in a way. But we can't change everything. We can't boil the ocean with them. And so it gives us the ability to be hyper-focused on the things that we can change, gives us the ability to hyper-focus on their customer to prove out that value. So it doesn't like appear down and kind of like the rate card of the offering, or it must be this, it must be that, but it stays up at that top level, and it gives us a whole lot of confidence on our yeses and our nos.
That's smart. It's almost more of like a filter than a menu.
Correct. Yeah.
And one of the
I think it opens up a lot more for us.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges between that yes and no answer, and where Tim and I spend a lot of time, is trying to really understand what that pain point is that customer or that prospect is feeling. And I think M&A is a unique space where oftentimes when we go into a pitch or a call or a meeting, that buyer may see the value, or they understand it and they get it, but it's very hard for them to articulate the exact problem that they're feeling. Which leads us to a set of questions from them on, is this something you're trying to ignite as change when you're inside your organization? Is this a resourcing issue that you have in terms of where your company is on the maturity curve of doing M&A? Is this a lessons learned from past deals that you've done that you're trying now to write? And all of those sort of conversation points lead us to then think about how our services should be positioned in a repeatable way, because those pain points are going to be the same ones that come up in the next pitch that we do in the next one. But that between that yes and no, I think what we're finding is there's so many pain points that need to be synthesized and distilled down for us to be successful. This is kind of the journey that we're on now. That is lending itself to, is this a bespoke service that we're putting out, depending on like someone having a very unique challenge that they're coming in with, or is this something that's very repeatable, right, but hard to articulate in a really succinct way that we can help with.
I want to shift a little bit to how you've thought about really building the business. So to what extent are you guys focused on sort of working on the business, meaning sort of driving sales and that side of it versus working in the business on the delivery side?
Yeah, it's a balance. It's the probably the hardest thing that is out there. I think because M&A can be quite complex, and you need to understand both sides of, for us, there's really two parties, right? So the acquiring company more than likely is hiring us, but the acquired company is just as much hiring us, even though they don't know it yet, usually. And so we have to be hyper focused on finding that balance. And another thing that Salesforce was good at that we've learned from is you almost got to put the acquired company up on a pedestal to protect them from the acquiring company, just like smashing them out. Thank you for your thing. Now, goodbye. Your old systems, your old culture, your old everything is now completely gone. And I think that we spend a lot of time trying to understand that, and it just takes time. You got to build relationships. You got to build trust. You got to understand the business. You got to understand why the acquisitions happened. And all of that means that when we're doing that, we're not working on acquire to win.
Yeah.
And, we're not too old yet and with acquire to win. It's been about a little more than a year and a half. But we've had, some good success, and we've learned a lot. And I think the challenge that we've put on ourselves now for Gagan and I is to really start to find those people that can work and engage with our customers and on our next ones that allow us to step back a little bit and say, how do we find more customers? How do we find more people? How do we find better ways to do this? How do we find better positioning? How do we find it? The list goes on and on and on, right? So it is the hardest thing I think that we are working on right now.
Yeah, I imagine that, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I imagine one of the challenges you have is if you guys are out pitching the work, then, the client is saying, great, but I want you two doing it, and you say, no, we have these people who are super qualified, which I know you've built a great network. But that I've found that personally to be a challenge. And I was curious if that's something you've experienced as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think we have a bit of a period where we do some handoff, right? It's a little bit of that baton where we bring in somebody, so we're there, and the folks that we're working with, we have a new partner that just started this month, and we have others that are in the hopper that are going to be coming and joining us. We have a couple of people who are now full-time employed with us. We've got a bench of 1099 contractors that we work with. But the point of all that is we've got a good group that we can bring in and have this kind of overlap. And they're all better than I am. Like, hey, customers out there, I'm telling you right now, you'd rather have all of them than me. I'm just telling you. And because they we've been trying to work with people that we've worked with in the past that are excellent. And it just makes it so much easier when they're better than me. I can be like, I want this to go farther and faster, and so let me get out of the way, and you guys should work with him or her to go crush this thing. And finding good people is really, really hard. And working your network, not just for opportunities, but for also friends and partners and employees and people that can help you is just as vital. And the more that you trust them and the more that they're better than you, the more that you can go work on the business.
I think this first year, I think Tim, you would agree, is very much a chicken and the egg game of, how are we what's gonna come first in terms of how we meet what our demand is with the capacity that needs to be there. And this year has been all about Tim and Gagan going out and building the business, driving the go-to-market, getting the interest, and then also delivering on the work. And so you got, I think we figured out what our inflection point was for the two of us to, maximize our returns for clients that we've pulled in, but then also think about what that sort of forecast and pipeline needs to look like 6 or 12 months out. And that's sort of forced us to have these discussions about our bench and, talented professionals we can bring in, to Tim's point, either as full-time employees or, tenured in-house M&A professionals that want to continue doing the same type of work, but maybe have gone through the same experience of, a RIF or a different life circumstance or want to pursue something new, but they totally see the vision we have and want to be in the boat with us. So definitely a chicken and the egg game, but I think there's a lot of interest and excitement we've garnered that, we've got some confidence in our plan for next year.
How have you thought, you mentioned the bringing on the partner, and I did see that announcement. How have you approached bringing on full-time employees versus building this bench of talent as you expand the business?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many aspects to it, and it all comes down to numbers, and it's not just dollars; it's also hours, right? And we early on, Gagan talked about looking at our capacity and our forecast 6 months out. I mean, there were days early on where we were looking at our capacity 6 hours out, right? And I have a 2.5-year-old and a half-year-old, and Gagan's got one and one on the way. Like we didn't want to start this to be working till midnight or 1 a.m. and then waking up in a cold sweat at 4 and re-engaging with whatever issue we needed to be re-engaging with our customers, right? And so it became, we had some success early that showed us, you're not going to be able to do this by yourselves, right? You have to go get help, and you have to go get people. So hours was like the first club over the top of the head. And then it became dollars, right? What can we afford to do? We don't want to go take investment. It's a services business, right? We don't need to get right now. We don't need to get a whole bunch of engineers to build us something or to AIify our offerings or whatever it might be. And so, it's all kind of like sitting with us. So you just start doing the arithmetic of, what's that pass-through rate? What can we get? How can we stay afloat on this particular pitch that we're putting out there? And then when you start doing that, then you say, okay, I have people that I need. I can afford in the right way to go get 2 people on this one to go win this deal. And you're one step ahead of the lawman all the time. And if our customers listening to this, they probably are like, where'd this person come from? It's because this might work, and we're going to need 2 people here. And we've got this great bench that we've spent our time building. Person A, person B, are you all available to start next week on this, that, and the other? All right, let's go introduce them. Let's finalize the proposal. Let's get the thing signed, and let's go. And that's that kind of one step ahead of the lawman at right now. That's the methodology that we're using. We can't do that forever because you can't be on the run forever, right? And so we're going to, as we go into next year, we've brought on a partner. We're going to bring on another one. We're going to start to hire a little bit more as we believe a little bit more in the cash flow that's coming, and that we can put that out without having to go, frankly, borrow money.
We've alluded to it, but I mean, you guys have accomplished a lot in a short time with the business, but you're still relatively early on in this journey. Even looking back a year and a half to when you started this, if you were to start today, what would you do differently and why?
Oh, that's a good one.
I know what I would say. There was a piece of advice that we got from a man by the name of TC. And I won't give his full name, and if he ever listens to this, I'm going to send this to him, and I'll say, like, TC, look, at the big shout out. But I met with him pretty early on, and he said he has started several services businesses and other businesses, in fact. And he said, whatever happens, you have to focus on 2 things. You got to close and collect. And everything else from there will work itself out. Because when you close, now you got to go engage and make that customer happy, and that will all flow. And if you collect, now you can figure out how to pay for all the stuff on the back end to make your business run. And I think that piece of advice was exactly right, and we've kind of lived that. But the one thing I'll say that I will be counter to his advice is he said, don't worry about your marketing. Don't worry about your materials. Don't worry about your website. Don't worry about your value proposition. You'll work all that stuff out. And I will say his close and collect was exactly right. But the thing that I would change is I would lean a whole lot more into perfecting and nailing our value proposition so that you can speak and pitch and convince more cleanly and clearly than we did in the early stages. And it's just repetition. But that means that you're having those conversations and your ears are open to how you can adjust and how you can make it sharper and all of that kind of stuff. In my mind, the CEO at Salesforce, Mark Benioff, I've always thought of him as like a chief marketing officer more than anything else. He's very good.
Or even like chief community officer. I feel like that's what I read when I read his book. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And he's just very good about like putting the message out there on repeat and getting on to getting out with what he wants to say. And I think there's a big lesson there that you've got to spend time on that message. And that means that you're doing it not on your computer by yourself talking to ChatGPT. It means you're having conversations like this. You're having pitches. You're going to events. You're on the phone. You're hitting that network. And you're like learning and writing down all of that stuff as you go through so that you can adjust and advance your message, your value proposition. So if I had to do it all over again, I'd spend a whole lot more time early on, like really like polishing, sandpapering, and making that message stronger.
Gagan, what about you? What would you do differently if you could go back, 14, 16 months?
It's I'm trying to think of a witty response, and I don't think I have one, because I think a lot of what we're doing is what I expected. But Tim and I talked a little bit about this before we were coming on the podcast. I think what I would do differently is maybe afford, this is not a tangible answer, but afford ourselves a little bit of grace with what the journey is going to look like. And I think in the early days, both of us coming out, there's some pressure on our shoulders, right? 2 wives, 4 kids, like to go out and make something real and make something happen. And just acknowledging that takes time and effort and work to really pull it through, is something I would say to myself if I had that opportunity, right? There's, I got the advice similar to to TC, which is you got to go out and you got to pound the pavement and you got to talk to customers, you got to meet them where they are, and you got to learn, and you got to figure that out. But you also got to, bring in the money. And I think one of the things that we did well, and I would give myself some reassurance on, is we had a lot of conversations just for the sake of having the conversations, a lot of advisory sessions and what we would call a workshop, just going out and talking, so we could learn, right? And we could be really clear on how to meet our prospects and our customers where they are, even if it didn't amount to a closed won deal or revenue. And I can say 1,000%, Tim, I think you would agree that paid dividends, right? We spent the first 3 months of the year maybe getting really strong on that, and it just gave us a ton of runway into the rest of the year to feel good about what we were putting out there that met our customers where they are, because we were meeting them where they are and learning about their pain points and helping them address exactly what those pain points look like, even if it didn't mean revenue right in the door at that moment. That's our mindset. But running those two things in parallel, and keeping pace with each of those, I would just remind myself it takes time, give ourselves some grace, and that we're still on the journey, but it'll come through in the right way.
Yeah. I think, Tim, you should listen to Gagan here. I think he's right that you should give yourself some grace. No, as it's funny as just listening to both of your perspectives, I actually think you were perfecting your pitch. It's not something you can start with. It's an iterative process. And it sounds like, Gagan, that's what you guys were doing. So I think TC is right, but you were doing the work, just maybe not calling it that. So,
maybe a little look behind the veil here, but we've got our own company values, and I think we've got a good balance of what we call, I'll say it, Tim, the TC mindset with a lot of the other components we talked about. So he's up there. He's up there in the values. Yeah.
It's like this is like the wizard behind the curtain. So you can, it's, well, thank you guys both so much for joining me. It's been great, getting to know you guys a little bit over the last few months and spending the time together today. I'll give you each just, a quick moment. If you were to give advice to, someone in your shoes who's throwing that Nerf football in, a corporate setting, and they have years of decade, plus experience in a field, what would be your quick advice to them if they were thinking about going out on their own and leveraging their experience to do so?
Yeah, I think I've said this throughout this episode, but I think leaning on your corner. I box. I'm a boxer, and so I always have boxing analogies that I'm starting to pull out more often. But like leaning on your corner, whoever that is, or whatever community that looks like, is massive, right? Get out of your head and talk to who are your champions, who are your allies, who's going to keep you honest, who's going to keep you accountable, and have those conversations to the point that you can get your mental model right on what you think it is that you want to go after. Because it's way easier. You may not have like the Tim and Gagan duo that you're going to go and launch something with, right? But you've got you've got a community behind you that wants to see you succeed. And we talk about this all the time. There's always people out there that want to see us succeed, and have those conversations. Keep yourself accountable, and that's just the starting point. That'll ignite what the next step looks like for you. That would be my advice.
Great advice, Tim. What about you?
Yeah. I think we've touched on a little bit. I would say get a partner in crime would be my number one piece. But I think to build and to add another one would be you got to love it, right? And I think a lot of people are, they are, you may be sitting in a corporate job, or they are looking for something different, or they're frustrated. And it is not easy to go out on your own. And I love M&A work. Mm-hmm. When I started it 15 years ago, I got lucky and got put on to Nielsen's acquisition of Arbitron, and I just absolutely loved it. And I think you've got to have that desire deep inside of you to do the thing that you are going to be doing in as a solo shop or with a partner in some form of a services business. And so if you love the content that you think is the kind of the right path for you, I think that you probably have something to go be crazy and leave your job and start this thing. But at the end of the day, M&A is very scary work, and when we come in and help, and people, you see their minds turn about from fear to opportunity. There's nothing better, and I love that M&A work, and so it gives me the kind of the charge to go and do the things that we do as we're starting this thing.
That's awesome. If people want to find out more about Acquire to Win or connect with either of you, what's the best way to do that? Yeah,
I think that, obviously there's the foundational things. We have, www.acquiretowin.com to the number 2. And then we're very active as well on LinkedIn. There's Acquire to Win page, as well as Tim and Gagan's page. We're always posting amazing insights on how the M&A world is rocking and rolling. So you can find us through either of those, our webpage or through LinkedIn.
Great. We'll post those in the show notes. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me today.
This was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chrissie. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Self-Funded. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow the show wherever you're listening so you don't miss what's coming next. I'd also love for you to leave a review and share what you're most excited about on your own self-funded journey. And if you want to go deeper, check out my Substack. You'll find the link below. Until next time, keep carving your own path.